Okay, today we're going to talk about some conventions for using numbers and variables. And the conventions they're not really rules, they're not a law or anything like that, but they're just agreed upon ways of doing things so that everybody does it the same way and there's not confusion. So, some examples of conventions in everyday life. Again, these things aren't laws or anything like that, but we just we shake hands when we meet someone. Okay, it's just kind of an agreed upon way that people greet each other when they first meet. Another one might be that when you cough, you cover your mouth. Again, you're not breaking the law if you don't cover your mouth when you cough, but it's just a kind of an agreed upon thing that people do. So those are examples of conventions. Get those down. We're going to talk about some ones again in mathematics. Specifically with multiplication and division, how we write things, how we do things that we've agreed upon. I just want to mention as you're taking notes here, if you need to pause the video at any time to make sure you get something written down, go ahead and do that. You can also rewind to get something if you need to, so you can kind of go at your own pace here as you're taking them. But make sure you get all the notes down. You need to get them written down in order to be able to do your assignment. So some conventions for multiplication. If you look at these top ones here, that 8n, what that means is 8 times n. Or it could be n times 8. But the agreed upon way to do that is if we have a number times a letter or a letter times a number, the agreed upon way to write it is to put the number first with the letter written next to it. And we don't need to use the multiplication symbol or the dot for multiplication or anything like that. When they're written next to one another, it means we're going to multiply. Same with that mn there. That means m times n, or again, it could be n times m. It really doesn't matter in multiplication which order they're in. And then the last one, that's always a tricky one for people. They forget when it's just a letter that there's really a 1 in front of that letter. And we'll talk about later why we don't need to put the 1 in there. But that really means 1 times n, or again, n times 1. Remember, when you multiply something by 1, you just get that same thing back. Like 1 times 5 is 5, 1 times 4 is 4, 1 times 52 is 52. So it makes sense, 1 times n is just n. Going down to the bottom there, conventions for division. So we have, notice we're using a fraction bar, we're not using the division symbol. Okay, so the first one there you could read as 1 over n or 1 divided by n. The second one is n over 5, or we could read it as n divided by 5. And then the third one there, we could read that as 4n over 9 or 4n divided by 9. One thing I want you to notice for these ones in division is we never switch the order like we did in multiplication. And the reason is because order matters in division. Okay, you cannot switch the order with a division problem and get the same answer. Multiplication you can. Division you cannot switch the order. It will not work. Okay, next here, we're just looking at this example with multiplication with a variable. So we know dogs have 4 legs. So if we want to know how many legs there are, if we know the number of dogs, we can easily calculate that. Okay, if it's 1 dog, 1 times 4 is 4, it's going to have 4 legs. If we have 2 dogs, 2 times 4 is 8. We'll have 8 legs. Okay, so on and so forth. And we can go all the way down here. You see 5 dogs, 5 times 4 is going to equal 20 legs. Now the n represents any number. So whatever number of dogs we want to know, we can just substitute that in for n and figure it out. So that would be n times 4, which we would just write as 4n. So 4n represents the number of legs when there are n dogs. Okay, each dog has 4 legs. You're going to multiply that by the number of dogs. That's all the rule is saying. So again, just a little thing about conventions here. Again, they're an agreed upon way of writing, agreed upon ways of writing mathematics. Okay, so for multiplication, we're going to start using the dot instead of the x. Okay, and the reason is when we use variables, you don't want to confuse the symbol for multiplication with the variable x. When you multiply a variable by 1, you just write the variable. Okay, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. The third one here, when you multiply a variable by a number, or when you multiply a variable by another variable, no multiplication symbol is used. Okay, you don't have to do that. And then the last one, also a big one. Okay, when you multiply a variable by a number, the number is written first. Okay, so if you look at the examples, in example 2 here, those are conventions for writing things involving multiplication. All right, this next one here involves division. So in this example, it says Dwayne has a piece of rope, it's 36 yards long. He wants to cut the rope into pieces that are equal in length. Can you calculate how long the pieces are if you know into how many pieces he cuts the rope? So again, they're going through the examples there. If he cuts it into 3 pieces, I'm going to take the 36 divided by 3 to figure out that it's 12 inches for each piece of rope, or 12 yards, I'm sorry. If we cut it into 4, 36 divided by 4, each piece is going to be 9 yards. 36 divided by 8, it's 4.5 yards each piece. So on and so forth. So again, you're going to substitute the n is going to be the number of pieces. So for the n, you can substitute however many pieces you want to cut it into. 36 divided by that number is going to tell you what the length of each piece is when you cut that many. Now, some conventions here for division. Again, we don't want to use the division symbol anymore. We want to start using the fraction bar. Okay, this is a big one. Okay, put a star next to that so you remember. Same with if it's just 2 letters. Again, you're not using the division symbol anymore. You want to use the fraction bar. Okay, that's the big idea for dividing, is we want to start using the fraction bar instead of the division symbol. Okay, so in these examples here, we're going to rewrite these using our conventions for multiplication and division. So a times 5, again, remember we're going to write that. The number comes first, the letter comes second. So instead of a times 5, we're just going to write 5a. Instead of a divided by 5, we're not going to use that symbol anymore. We're going to use the fraction bar. Same with C. We're not using the division symbol anymore. We're using the fraction bar. For D, when we take a variable times another variable, we're not putting the symbol in between them. We're just writing them next to one another. Now letter E, a little bit trickier because we've got 3 times 4 there. Well, we know what 3 times 4 is. That's 12. And again, that would be 12 times A. We would just write the A next to the 12. Okay, for 2, calculate the value of 2m over 6n if m equals 6 and n equals 2. So instead of m, I'm going to put the 6 in there, and I always put that in parentheses. And on the bottom, instead of that 6n, 6 times n, we're going to do 6 times 2. So on top, 2 times 6 is 12. On the bottom, 6 times 2 is 12. 12 divided by 12 just ends up being 1. For part B, our explanation of how we found the value, well, you just substitute the 6 for m, and 2 for n, and calculate the value. All right, we got Dwayne and Jamal here, they manage a student store. They sell erasers for 21 cents each. So what's the cost of 4 erasers? Well, there's 2 ways you could look at this. If you were going to buy 4 erasers and you knew they were 21 cents each, you could just do 21 plus 21 plus 21 plus 21. Okay, and that would give you your 84 cents. Another way you could look at this, okay, if they're 21 cents a piece, and you're going to buy 4 of them, you can just do 21 times 4, and that's also 84 cents. The multiplication, probably a little easier. Now B, it says using conventions correctly, write a mathematical expression for the cost of n erasers. Well, when we wanted to know the cost of 4 erasers, we did 21 times 4. So if we want the cost of n erasers, we would just do 21 times n. All right, for number 4, school store sells pencils by the box. There are 15 pencils in each box. So how many pencils are in 6 boxes? Well, easy way to figure that out would be, if there's 15 in a box, we would take that times the 6 boxes, and you would get the 90 pencils. So if we take 15 times 6 for 6 boxes, if we have n boxes, we would just do 15 times n to get the number of pencils in n boxes. All right, finishing up here. Number 5, to wrap this up, it says in mathematics it is a convention to write 4n instead of 4 times n or 4.n. And this is used to avoid confusion. Why might it be confusing if you use the X symbol to indicate multiplication of numbers and variables? Well, the reason is it looks like the letter X, so you might confuse it for a variable. Again, there's no way to really know. Number 6, another convention is to write n instead of 1 times n. So why do you think this makes sense? Well, again, any number times 1 is that number. So for example, if we take 1 times 5, that's just going to be 5. If we take 1 times 6, well, that's just going to be 6. So 1 times n is just going to equal n. Again, it doesn't matter what number n is, it's just going to equal it when you multiply it by 1. And then number 7, what might be confusing if you did not use the dot or X to represent multiplication of 2 whole numbers? Well, for example, 3 times 4 would look like 34. How would you know if it's supposed to be 3 times 4 if it's just supposed to be the number 34? So again, that's why when it's 2 numbers, you have to use the dot for the multiplication symbol. And then lastly, just to wrap this up, close this out, what is a mathematical convention and why are they important? Well, it's an agreed upon way of doing something, and it's important because it avoids confusion. So if we're all doing it the same way, we're not confused about what's going on. Again, if there's something you didn't get down, pause, rewind the video, whatever you need to get all your notes. You need to have all the notes down before you can do the homework. And on here it says that it's a worksheet, but it will be, your homework will be online. So thanks for watching. Make sure you got everything, and then show me your completed note sheet.